Well, just a few days ago, we learned of the death of Mother Angelica, the founder of EWTN. One of the most significant figures, I would say, in the life of the American Catholic Church these last 50 years. I'll also say, I know from direct experience that, go back to the 80s, 90s of the last century, it was practically de rigueur in fashionable Catholic circles to make fun of Mother Angelica. She was a crude popularizer, she was anti-conciliar, she was a culture warrior, et cetera, et cetera. But what's interesting is a lot of her critics have faded away, and yet her influence and her impact are undeniable today. Think of the fact that EWTN, which began literally in a garage in Alabama, has now grown to be the largest media group of its type in the world. 230 million homes are reached by EWTN in 144 countries. And so, extraordinary thing that this feisty nun from Canton, Ohio managed to produce. If you want all the details of how Rita Rizzo, that was her given name, became eventually a nun, a foundress, and the one who established EWTN, read the splendid biography written by Raymond Arroyo. I think it's a very fine book, a fascinating book, of spiritual significance. It's more than just of historical interest. It's a real spiritual significance. But I want to focus just in this video on three elements of her legacy. One, I think, is her tremendous confidence in divine providence. The second is her keen sense of the supernatural. And the third, I think the most important, is the link between suffering and the love of God. So those three things I want to talk about real briefly. First of all, providence. Mother Angelica had a keen sense that if God gave you a job to do, He inspired you to do something, He would also provide the means so you could accomplish it. She trusted that. In the face of every type of objection and obstacle, she trusted that God would provide for this thing that He had inspired her to do. There are a lot of stories around EWTN that remind me of the stories of the beginnings of great movements and orders in the church, where the miraculous has a role to play. I'll just give you two. My favorite is the one dealing with Deacon Bill Steltemeyer. Bill, as you know, was the kind of right-hand man to Mother Angelica for many years. Lawyer, businessman, who helped her, manage a lot of the practical affairs. But the story of Bill's coming to EWTN, which he himself confirmed for me. I never met Mother Angelica, but I was involved with EWTN a number of times, and I did meet Deacon Bill. He confirmed the story. Namely, he came to Chicago many years ago. He was a permanent deacon, but a lawyer and a businessman too. Came for a convention. And he went to Mass at Holy Name Cathedral, downtown Chicago. And he sees in the vestibule this little flyer announcing a talk by a nun whom he didn't know at a local Chicago parish. But something told him, I got to go hear this nun. So this is pre, GPS and all that. He didn't know where he was going. He's not from Chicago. It was a winter night, typical Chicago winter night, terrible weather. So despite all these troubles, he arrives an hour late for the talk. And he sees Mother Angelica and listens to her and didn't know who she was. But toward the end of the talk, he who had never had an experience like this before or since, heard, he said, a voice that said to him, "Until the day you die." And he said, I didn't know. First of all, I'm hearing a voice. Secondly, what does it mean? Until the day you die, what? He goes home. He never met Mother that night. He didn't even talk to her. He went home. I think he lived in Tennessee. But for a month, it just ate at him. It bothered him. Like, what does this mean? I'm seeing this nun and I hear a voice until the day you die. Finally, his wife said to him, look, just go. Just go wherever she is. Go find her and see her. And so he did. He drives down to Alabama. He looks up the monastery where Mother Angelica was. Rings the doorbell. She opens the door herself. Big smile and says, "I've been expecting you." And so that's how he came to EWTN. And the voice was prophetic because Bill died, I don't know, a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. And so literally until the day he died, he was with Mother Angelica helping her. The second story I know people have heard, but it's wonderful. When the network was getting off the ground and she wanted to expand things, and so she orders this huge satellite dish and didn't have the money to pay for it, but she went ahead and ordered it. So the dish arrives by this big truck, and the driver says, "Is this the Mother Angelica? I'm supposed to ask you right away for the money because I'm not going to leave this thing here until we're paid, and it's $600,000." So she goes, "Just give me a minute." And she goes in the chapel and she says, "All right, Lord, I thought you wanted me to have this thing, and so I ordered it. So you better come through." She goes back out, basically to tell the guy, "I'm sorry, I don't have the money." With that, one of the young nuns runs up to her. Mother, there's someone on the phone that wants to talk to you right away." It turns out there's this businessman, this tycoon, on a yacht in the Bahamas, calling Mother Angelica to say, I've read some of your books and I've admired you, but something just told me I need to give you a gift of $600,000. She said, "Wire it right away." And that's how they got the dish, which you can still see to this day. When you go down there, you see this giant dish. And that's how it arrived. Providence, providence, providence. Trust in providence. If you got an inspiration from God, have the confidence He'll give you the means to accomplish it. There's the first lesson. Here's the second one. I think at a key moment in the life of the American church anyway, she realized the central importance of the supernatural. Now, I realize that might sound overly obvious, for a nun, but trust me, because I lived through this time. In the years after the council, there was a terrible tendency to naturalize the supernatural, to underplay the supernatural element of Christianity, and turn the faith basically into a social justice organization or a psychological self-help movement, right? I'm exaggerating a bit, but not that much. I lived through that time. A tendency to naturalize the supernatural. Mother Angelica realized, I think with great intuition, that a church that goes that route soon loses its soul and thereby loses the very thing it wants, which is relevance to the culture. See? So what she did in EWTN, you can see it to this day. She re-emphasized prayer and the liturgy and confession and spiritual warfare and the sacraments and the sacramentals, the properly supernatural dimension of the faith. I think she, along with John Paul II and others, accomplished a great thing in doing that because it reversed the momentum that was leading us in a bad direction. I can say this too as someone who taught for many years at Mundelein Seminary and served as rector there, and so dealt with the younger generation of Catholics over the last 20 some years. That's why they liked her. That's why they responded to her, because they found a supernatural Catholicism compelling in a way that a hyper-naturalized one wasn't. So I think she was really onto something with that second move. Here's the third bit of her legacy I do think is the most important, namely the centrality of suffering in the life of grace. You see it in all the saints, of course. They all participate in the cross of Jesus to some degree. Somehow suffering accomplishes something in the body of Christ that nothing else will accomplish. It'll affect something. Suffering offered up to God for the purposes of His providence will accomplish things that nothing else will. Nowhere was this clearer than in her last 15 years. So Mother Angelica has a stroke in 2001 that's so debilitating that this very vocal, very active woman is now basically confined to a bed and a wheelchair. During those 15 years, she was a lot like Mother Drexel, Mother Catherine Drexel, who founded her order, was a very active, very involved figure, traveling all over the country until, at the age of 75, she had a heart attack, which limited her to such a degree that she spent her last 20 years, she lived to be 95, her last 20 years in her mother house at prayer. Many have pointed out that Mother Drexel's greatest contribution to her own order were those 20 years of prayer. Something very similar, I think, in Mother Angelica, the prayer and the suffering she endured. There's a great story where she told one of her nuns, if I'm going through some kind of crisis, tell the doctor to do anything to keep me alive. But not because she was clinging to life, but because she said, I want to offer another day of suffering on behalf of my community. That's a mystic's kind of insight into the power of suffering. She wasn't perfect. She'd be the first one to admit it. She often talked about that. I think lacking a really high-level theological education, lacking a certain polish. At times, her views were unnuanced, I would say, maybe a little bit, unbalanced. She had a hot temper, a hot Italian temper, and that led her to make sometimes, I think, ad hominem attacks, or maybe not fairly to characterize her opponent's point of view. So I think she'd admit that too. But those are finally quibbles. I mean, I think she was someone who made a signal contribution to the life of the Church in America after Vatican II.